the economy of Zimbabwe shrank significantly after 2000, resulting in a desperate situation for the country, widespread poverty and an 80% unemployment rate. However, after 2008, Zimbabwe's economy started to improve dramatically and it became one of the fastest-growing economies in southern Africa. Between 2009 and 2011, Zimbabwe's GDP growth averaged 7.3%, making it one of the world's fastest-growing economies. Zimbabwe's participation from 1998 to 2002 in the war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo set the stage for this deterioration by draining the country of hundreds of millions of dollars. Hyperinflation in Zimbabwe was a major problem from about 2003 to April 2009, when the country suspended its own currency. Zimbabwe faced 231 million % peak hyperinflation in 2008. The country has reserves of metallurgical-grade chromite. Other commercial mineral deposits include coal, asbestos, copper, nickel, gold, platinum and iron ore. Current economic conditions. Since 2000, Zimbabwe has seized and forcibly redistributed most of the country's commercial farms. The new occupants, which included several prominent members of the ruling ZANU-PF administration, were usually inept, inexperienced, or uninterested in farming thereby failing to retain the labor-intensive, highly efficient, management of previous landowners. Short-term gains were achieved by selling the land or equipment. The contemporary lack of agricultural expertise has triggered severe export losses and negatively affected market confidence. Idle land is now being utilized by local peasants practicing meager subsistence farming. Production of staple foodstuffs, such as maize, has recovered accordingly unlike typical export crops including tobacco and coffee. Zimbabwe has also sustained the 30th occurrence of recorded hyperinflation in world history. Government spending is 97.8% of GDP. State enterprises are strongly subsidized, taxes and tariffs are high. State regulation is costly to companies, starting or closing a business is slow and costly. Labor market is highly regulated, hiring a worker is cumbersome and firing a worker is difficult. By 2008 unemployment had risen to 94%. Infrastructure and resources. Transportation Zimbabwe has adequate internal transportation and electrical power networks, however maintenance has been neglected over several years. Poorly paved roads link the major urban and industrial centers, and rail lines managed by the National Railways of Zimbabwe tie it into an extensive Central African railroad network with all its neighbors. Energy. The Zimbabwe Electricity Supply Authority is responsible for providing the country with electrical energy. Zimbabwe has two larger facilities for the generation of electrical power, the Kariba Dam and since 1983 by large Wang Thermal Power Station adjacent to the Wang coal field. However, total generation capacity does not meet the demand, leading to rolling blackouts. The Wang station is not capable of using its full capacity due to old age and maintenance neglect. In 2006, crumbling infrastructure and lack of spare parts for generators and coal mining led to Zimbabwe importing 40% of his power, 100 megawatts from the Democratic Republic of Congo, 200 megawatts from Mozambique, up to 450 from South Africa, and 300 megawatts from Zambia. In May 2010 the country's generation power was an estimated 940 MW against a peak demand of 2500 MW. Use of local small-scale generators is widespread. Telephone. The telephone service is problematic, and new lines used to be difficult to obtain. This has since changed as SIM cards are readily available at most retail shops. Zimbabwe has only one terrestrial service provider however, and a lack of competitiveness impacts badly the local population. Cellular phone networks are an alternative. Principal mobile phone operators are Telcel, Net1, Econet. Agriculture. Agriculture in Zimbabwe can be divided into two parts: industrialized farming of crops such as cotton, tobacco, coffee, peanuts and various fruits, and subsistence farming with staple crops such as maize or wheat. The former of the two was almost exclusively in the hands of the white minority until the highly controversial and disastrous land redistribution program that started in 2000. This part of the agricultural economy was highly profitable and large amounts of the produce were exported. Subsistence farming is important for the black majority and has gained importance under the land redistribution program. Industrialized farming was once the backbone of the domestic Zimbabwean economy and contributed up to 40% of the exported produce. The result of large-scale eviction of competent commercial white farmers, the government's land reform efforts and the severing of economic ties with Mozambique, means that was no longer the case. Reliable crop estimates are no longer available since the agricultural marketing system collapsed. The government banned maize imports, stating record crops for the year of 2004. The University of Zimbabwe estimated in 2008 that between 2000 and 2007 agricultural production decreased by 51%. Maize was the country's largest domestic crop prior to the farm evictions. Tobacco was the largest export crop followed by cotton. Poor government has exacerbated meager harvests caused by drought and floods, resulting in significant food shortfalls beginning in 2001. Land reform has found considerable support in Africa and a few supporters among African American activists, but Jesse Jackson commented during a visit to South Africa in June 2006, "Land redistribution has long been a noble goal to achieve, but it has to be done in a way that minimizes trauma. The process is to attract investors rather than scare them away. What is required in Zimbabwe is democratic rule. Democracy is lacking in the country and that is the major cause of this economic meltdown. Mining sector as are the southern African countries, Zimbabwean soil is rich in raw materials. Namely platinum, coal, iron ore, gold and lately also diamonds have been found in considerable deposits. Also copper, chromite and nickel deposits exist, though in lesser amounts. The Marange diamond fields, discovered in 2006, are thought to be among the richest in the world. In March 2011, the government of Zimbabwe implemented laws which required local ownership of mining companies. Following this news, there were falls in the share prices of companies with mines in Zimbabwe. It has been reported by various NGOs that the diamond sector in Zimbabwe is rife with corruption. A November 2012 report by NGO Reap What You Sow revealed a huge lack of transparency of diamond revenues and that Zimbabwe unregistered trademark S elite are benefiting from the county unregistered trademark S diamonds. This followed former South African President Thabo Mbeki unregistered trademark S warning days earlier that Zimbabwe needed to stop its predatory from colluding with mining companies for their own benefit. Also in that month, the Associated Press reported that at least $2 billion worth of diamonds had been stolen from Zimbabwe unregistered trademark S Eastern Diamond Fields and had enriched Mugabe unregistered trademark S ruling circle and various connected gem dealers and criminals. In January 2013, Zimbabwe unregistered trademark S mineral exports totaled $1.8 billion. Education The state of education in Zimbabwe affects the development of the economy while the state of the economy can affect access and quality of teachers and education. Zimbabwe has one of Africa's highest literacy rates at over 90%. The population is usually better educated than the African average, making the people one of the greatest assets of the country. The crisis since 2000 has however diminished these achievements because of general lack of resources and the exodus of teachers to other countries. History 1980–2000 At the time of independence, annual inflation was 5.4% and month-to-month inflation was 0.5%. Currency of 2 Zimbabwean dollars, 5 Zimbabwean dollars, 10 Zimbabwean dollars and 20 Zimbabwean dollars denominations were released. $1 was equivalent to 0.657 Zimbabwean dollars. Roughly 95% of transactions used the Zimbabwean dollar. Following the Lancaster House Agreement in December 1979, the transition to majority rule in early 1980, and the lifting of sanctions, Zimbabwe enjoyed a brisk economic recovery. Real growth for 1980 to 1981 exceeded 20%. However, depressed foreign demand for the country's mineral exports and the onset of a drought cut sharply into the growth rate in 1982, 1983, and 1984. In 1985, the economy rebounded strongly due to a 30% jump in agricultural production. However, it slumped in 1986 to a zero growth rate and registered negative of about -3% in 1987, primarily because of drought and the foreign exchange crisis faced by the country. Zimbabwe's GDP grew on average by about 4.5% between 1980 and 1990. The government started crumbling when a bonus to Independence War veterans was announced in 1997, followed by unexpected spendings due to Zimbabwe's involvement in the Second Congo War in 1998. In 1999, the country also witnessed a drought which weakened the economy more. The economy could not recover, which ultimately led to the country's bankruptcy in the next decade. In the same year, 1999, Zimbabwe experienced its first defaults on its IMF, World Bank, and African Development Bank debts in addition to debts taken out with Western lenders. 2000 Euro 2009 . In recent years, there has been considerable economic hardship in Zimbabwe. Many Western countries argue that the government of Zimbabwe's land reform program, recurrent interference with, and intimidation of the judiciary, as well as maintenance of unrealistic price controls and exchange rates, has led to a sharp drop in investor confidence. Between 2000 and December 2007, the national economy contracted by as much as 40%. Inflation vaulted to over 66,000%, and there were persistent shortages of hard currency, fuel, medicine, and food. GDP per capita dropped by 40%. Agricultural output dropped by 51% and industrial production dropped by 47%. The Mugabe government attributes Zimbabwe's economic difficulties to sanctions imposed by the Western powers. It has been argued that the sanctions imposed by Britain, the US, and the EU have been designed to cripple the economy and the conditions of the Zimbabwean people in an attempt to overthrow President Mugabe's government. These countries on their side argue that the sanctions are targeted against Mugabe and his inner circle and some of the companies they own. Critics point to the so-called Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act of 2001, signed by Bush, as an effort to undermine Zimbabwe's economy. Soon after the bill was signed, IMF cut off its resources to Zimbabwe. Financial institutions began withdrawing support for Zimbabwe. Terms of the sanctions made it such that all economic assistance would be structured in support of democratization, respect for human rights and the rule of law. The EU terminated its support for all projects in Zimbabwe. Because of the sanctions and US and EU foreign policy, none of Zimbabwe's debts have been cancelled as in other countries. Other observers also point out how the asset freezes by the EU on people or companies associated with Zimbabwe's government have had significant economic and social costs to Zimbabwe. As of February 2004, Zimbabwe's foreign debt repayments ceased, resulting in compulsory suspension from the International Monetary Fund. This, and the United Nations World Food Programme stopping its food aid due to insufficient donations from the world community, has forced the government into borrowing from local sources. Hyperinflation 2004-2009 . Zimbabwe began experiencing severe foreign exchange shortages, exacerbated by the difference between the official rate and the black market rate in 2000. In 2004, a system of auctioning scarce foreign currency for importers was introduced, which temporarily led to a slight reduction in the foreign currency crisis, but by mid-2005 foreign currency shortages were once again severe. The currency was devalued by the central bank twice, first to 9,000 to the US dollar, and then to 17,500 to the US dollar on July 20, 2005, but at that date it was reported that that was only half the rate available on the black market. In July 2005, Zimbabwe was reported to be appealing to the South African government for $1 billion of emergency loans, but despite regular rumors that the idea was being discussed, no substantial financial support has been publicly reported. The official Zimbabwean dollar exchange rate had been frozen at 101,196 Zimbabwean dollars per US dollar since early 2006, but as of July 27, 2006 the parallel rate has reached 550,000 Zimbabwean dollars per US dollar. By comparison, 10 years earlier, the rate of exchange was only 9 Zimbabwean dollars and 13 cents per USD. In August 2006 the RBZ revalued the Zimbabwean dollar by 1,000 Zimbabwean dollars to $1. At the same time Zimbabwe devalued the Zim dollar by 60% against the USD. New official exchange rate revalued 250 Zimbabwean dollars per USD. The parallel market rate was about revalued 1,200 Zimbabwean dollars to 1,500 Zimbabwean dollars per USD. In November 2006 it was announced that sometime around December 1 there would be a further devaluation and that the official exchange rate would change to revalued 750 Zimbabwean dollars per USD. This never materialized. However, the parallel market immediately reacted to this news with the parallel rate falling to 2,000 Zimbabwean dollars per USD and by year-end it had fallen to 3,000 Zimbabwean dollars per USD. On April 1, 2007 the parallel market was asking 30,000 Zimbabwean dollars for $1 USD. By year-end, it was down to about 2 million Zimbabwean dollars. On January 18, 2008, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe began to issue higher denomination ZWD bearer checks, including $10 million bearer checks, each of which was worth less than $1 and 35 cents on the parallel market at the time of first issue. On April 4, 2008 the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe introduced new $25 million and $50 million bearer checks. At the time of first issue they were worth 70 cents and $1 and 40 cents on the parallel market respectively. On May 1, 2008, the RBZ announced that the dollar would be allowed to float in value subject to some conditions. On May 6, 2008, the RBZ issued new $100 million and $250 million bearer checks. At the date of first issue the $250 million bearer check was worth approximately $1 and 30 cents on the parallel market. On May 15, 2008, a new $500 million bearer check was issued by the RBZ. At time of first issue it was worth $1 and 93 cents. In a widely unreported parallel move, on May 15, 2008, the RBZ issued 3 special agro checks with face values $5 billion, $25 billion and $50 billion. It is further reported that the new agro checks can be used to buy any goods and services like the bearer checks. On July 30, 2008, the governor of the RBZ, Gideon Gono, announced that the Zimbabwe dollar would be redenominated by removing 10 zeros, with effect from August 1, 2008. 10 billion Zimbabwean dollars became $1 after the redenomination. More banknotes were issued since Gono vowed to continue printing money, $10,000 and $20,000. $50,000, October 13. $100,000, $500,000 and $1 million, November 3. $10 million, December 2. $50 million and $100 million, December 4. $200 million. $500 million. $10 billion. $1 trillion. On February 2, 2009 a final denomination was implemented, cutting 12 zeros, before the Zimbabwe dollar was officially abandoned on April 12, 2009. Since then, Zimbabwe has issued a new currency. Dollarization, 2009 to present equals. In February 2009, the newly installed National Unity Government allowed foreign currency transactions throughout the economy as a measure to stimulate the economy and end inflation. The Zimbabwean dollar quickly lost all credibility, and by April 2009, the Zimbabwean dollar was suspended entirely, to be replaced by the US dollar in government transactions. In 2014 there were 8 legal currencies: US dollar, South African rand, Botswana pula, British pound sterling, Australian dollar, Chinese yuan, Indian rupee and Japanese yen. Dollarization reversed inflation, permitting the banking system to stabilize and the economy to resume slow growth after 2009. Dollarization also had other consequences, including reduced taxation and financial transparency, as people continued to keep their money out of the formal banking system. Extremely high real interest rates due to lack of capital. Government forced into a pay-as-you-go system, unable to spend more than it takes in, deficits of coinage for everyday transactions, leading to the adoption of South African rand coins, sweets, airtime for mobile phones or even condoms for small change. Counterfeiting currencies with which Zimbabweans are not familiar. In January 2013, Finance Minister Tendai Biti announced that Zimbabwe's national public account held just $217. The election budget for the July 2013 presidential election was $104 million and government budget for 2013 was $3.09 billion at a projected economic growth of 5%. In August 2014, Zimbabwe began selling treasury bills and bonds to pay public sector salaries that have been delayed as GDP growth weakens while the economy experiences deflation. $2 million was sold in July through private placements of 6-month treasury bills at an interest rate of 9.5%. According to IMF data, GDP growth is forecasted at 3.1% by the end of 2014, a major decline from an average rate of 10% between 2009 and 2012, while government data show that consumer prices declined for 5 consecutive months by the end of June. Poverty and unemployment. Poverty and unemployment are both endemic in Zimbabwe, driven by the shrinking economy and hyperinflation. Poverty rates run near 80%, while the unemployed is ranked as the world's largest, at 95%. As of January 2006, the official poverty line was $17,200 Zimbabwean dollars per month. However, as of July 2008 this had risen to 13 trillion Zimbabwean dollars per month. Most general laborers are paid under 200 billion Zimbabwean dollars per month. A nurse's salary in September was 12,542 Zimbabwean dollars, less than the cost of a soft drink. The lowest 10% of Zimbabwe's population represent 1.97% of the economy, while the highest 10% make 40.42%. The current account balance of the country is negative, standing at around $-517 million. The negative economic environment since the year 2000 has also impacted black Zimbabwean entrepreneurs, with a large number of them going bankrupt between 2000 to 2014. Government response. The 2007 Empowerment Bill to increase local ownership of economy was drafted for presentation to Parliament in July 2007. It was signed into law by President Mugabe on March 7, 2008. The law requires all white or foreign-owned business to hand over 51% of their business to indigenous Zimbabweans. Many economists predict this will plunge the country into deeper economic woes. In response to inflation, the government has introduced price controls, but enforcement has been largely unsuccessful. Police have been sent in to enforce requirements that shopkeepers sell goods at a loss. This has resulted in hundreds of shop owners being arrested under accusations of not having lowered prices enough. Because of this, basic goods no longer appear on supermarket shelves and the supply of petrol is limited. This has diminished public transport. This has not been a significant problem during the term of Reid. However, goods can usually be purchased for a high rate on the black market. In January 2010, Finance Minister Tendai Biti announced that Zimbabwe would seek highly indebted poor country status in order to cancel the country's $6 billion debt. Despite criticism from some government officials and economists, Biti stated that, among other strategies considered, seeking HIPC status was the best option. In addition to debt forgiveness, HIPC status and World Bank would also allow Zimbabwe access to World Bank resources and loans through the Euro unregistered trademark S Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility. The Government of National Unity. By the start of the 2009 the situation had been catastrophic for some time. The three parliamentary parties agreed on a government of national unity. Despite serious internal differences, this government made some important decisions that improved the general economic situation. First of all, the suspension of the national currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, in April 2009. That stopped hyperinflation and made normal forms of business possible again, by using foreign currencies such as the US American dollar, the South African rand, the EU's euro or the Botswana pula. The former finance minister Tendai Biti tried to hold a disciplined budget. In 2009, Zimbabwe recorded a period of economic growth for the first time in a decade. Post-government of national unity, following ZANU-PF's landslide electoral victory in the 2013 general elections, Patrick Chinamasa was appointed finance minister. Policies encouraging the indigenization of the economy were fast-tracked and laws requiring that 51% or more of non-black Zimbabwean-owned companies had to be handed over to black Zimbabweans were implemented. This has been credited with creating further uncertainty in the economy and negatively impacting investment climate in the country. Although legislation dealing with the indigenization of the Zimbabwean economy has been in development since 2007 and actively initiated by ZANU-PF in 2010, the policy has continued to be accused of being unclear and a form of racketeering by regulation. In April 2014, Chinamasa admitted that the country was heavily in debt and that the country desperately needed to come up with policies to attract foreign direct investment. Officially, Zimbabwe's debt is $7 billion or over 200% of the country's GDP. However, this figure is disputed, with figures as high as $11 billion being quoted once debts to other African countries and China are included. As of May 2014, it has been reported that Zimbabwe's economy was in decline following the period of relative economic stability during the government of national unity. It is estimated that Zimbabwe's manufacturing sector requires an investment of roughly $8 billion for working capital and equipment upgrades. A 2014 report by the Africa Progress Panel has found that of all the African countries looked at when working out how many years it would take to double per capita GDP, Zimbabwe fared the worst, and that at its current rate of development it would take 190 years for the country to double its per capita GDP. Uncertainty around the indigenization program, the perceived lack of a free press, the possibility of abandoning the US dollar as official currency, and political uncertainty following the end of the government of national unity with the MDC, as well as power struggles within ZANU-PF, have increased concerns that the counter-Euro unregistered trademark's economic situation could further deteriorate. See also, Economy of Africa, Economic History of Zimbabwe, Education in Zimbabwe, History of Zimbabwe, Zimbabwean dollar, Tobacco trade in Zimbabwe. References. External links: Economy of Zimbabwe at DMOZ, Zimbabwe latest trade data on ITC trade map, CIA World Factbook, Mbendi Zimbabwe overview, donors will move in when Mugabe finally leaves office, World Bank Zimbabwe summary trade statistics, 7.